Every morning, before the noise of the world rises and before the demands of the day begin to compete for your attention, a battle is already underway. It is not fought with fists or words, but with allegiance, authority, and awareness. The first moments of the day quietly determine who governs your thoughts, your reactions, and ultimately your direction. If you do not establish order early, disorder will gladly fill the vacuum. This is not poetic symbolism, it is spiritual law. The unseen realm does not wait for you to feel ready. It responds to structure, to obedience, and to those who understand the weight of delegated authority. When the day begins without prayer, it begins undefended. When it begins without truth spoken aloud, it begins undefined. Morning prayer is not ritual, it is reconnaissance. It is the act of stepping onto the field before the enemy advances, declaring alignment before opposition arises, and setting boundaries that chaos cannot cross. You are not waking up to survive the day, you are waking up to take responsibility for it. This is a battle prayer because the day will test what you believe. And this morning, you choose whether you will react to the day or command it. The morning is never empty space, it is contested ground already influenced before your feet touch the floor. Long before the calendar events line up and the responsibilities announce themselves, forces are already postured, waiting to see who will take the first move. Neutrality is an illusion. If you do not consciously establish alignment at the start of the day, something else will establish it for you. The mind does not drift toward order by default. It drifts toward whatever voice speaks first and loudest. Morning is the hinge point of the day because it sets the governing framework for everything that follows. Decisions later in the day are rarely spontaneous. They are echoes of what was settled early. When the mind wakes without direction, it immediately begins reacting, reviewing yesterday's failures, anticipating today's pressures, replaying unresolved conversations. That internal noise is not harmless. It is the first skirmish of the day, and it determines whether you will walk in clarity or confusion. Spiritual alignment is not an emotional exercise. It is positional. Authority does not come from intensity or volume, but from order. When prayer is delayed, authority is delayed. When truth is not spoken early, assumptions take its place. The unseen realm responds to structure, and the morning is when structure must be declared. This is why ancient patterns emphasized first fruits, first words, first actions. What is offered first governs what comes next. To ignore the morning is to surrender initiative. And initiative, once surrendered, is rarely regained without cost. The pressures of the day do not pause to allow you to get centered. They compound. A distracted morning produces a reactive afternoon, and a reactive afternoon produces compromised decisions by evening. None of this happens suddenly. It unfolds incrementally, quietly, predictably. Prayer at the beginning of the day is not about asking for protection, as though you are vulnerable and hoping for mercy. It is about asserting alignment with what is already established. You are not entering the day to discover truth. You are entering it to enforce truth. When you speak words of alignment early, you are not informing heaven. You are reminding yourself who governs the day. The battlefield of the morning is the mind. Thoughts arrive uninvited, demanding agreement. Some sound reasonable, some urgent, some familiar. But agreement is power. Whatever you agree with gains influence. This is why silence is never passive. Silence is consent. If you do not interrupt the flow of unexamined thoughts with deliberate truth, those thoughts will frame your perceptions and guide your responses without your awareness. Morning prayer interrupts that process. It establishes a filter. It declares that not every thought is welcome, not every emotion is authoritative, and not every urgency deserves obedience. When truth is spoken aloud, it forces alignment. Spoken words impose structure on internal chaos. They draw boundaries the mind recognizes even when emotions resist. The idea that the day just happens to you is one of the most effective deceptions. Days are shaped, not stumbled into, and shaping requires early action. Waiting until trouble appears before praying is like waiting until the breach occurs before fortifying the wall. The wall is built when there is no visible threat because that is when there is time to build it correctly. Morning is where jurisdiction is declared. What you tolerate early, you will battle later. What you confront early rarely gains momentum. This is not superstition, it is consistency. Patterns repeat because they are permitted to repeat. The morning is where permission is either granted or revoked. When you rise without intention, the day assigns you one. When you rise with prayer, you assign purpose to the day. That difference determines whether you spend the next hours reacting to pressure or advancing through it with clarity. The day does not need your energy nearly as much as it needs your alignment. A battle prayer in the morning is not about fear of what might happen. It is about confidence in what has already been settled. You are not bracing for impact. You are standing your ground before anything approaches. And when the ground is secured early, the battles later in the day are rarely surprises. They are simply confirmations that the morning mattered. Authority is not something you feel. It is something you stand in. Emotions fluctuate with sleep, stress, and circumstance, but authority remains fixed because it is rooted in position, not mood. This is why the morning must begin with declaration rather than assessment. If you begin the day by evaluating how you feel, you allow internal conditions to dictate external outcomes. But when you begin the day by establishing authority, feelings are brought into alignment instead of being placed in command. Many people confuse passion with power. They assume that if they pray with enough intensity, clarity will follow. Yet intensity without order produces exhaustion, not dominion. Authority operates on alignment with truth, not volume of expression. When truth is spoken deliberately at the start of the day, it does not ask permission from circumstances. It defines them. Declarations are not attempts to convince. They are acknowledgments of what is already established. The morning is the strategic moment for this because nothing has yet demanded your response. Once the day begins pulling at your attention, your words tend to become reactive. Reactive speech carries less authority because it is shaped by pressure rather than purpose. Declarative speech, spoken before pressure arrives, carries weight because it originates from clarity. To decree is not to wish. It is to state what governs. When you speak alignment early, you are not trying to force outcomes. You are refusing to allow disorder to set the terms. This is why spoken truth matters. Thoughts remain internal, easily overridden. Spoken words cross a threshold. They move from contemplation to commitment. Once spoken, they require consistency, and consistency is the backbone of authority. Authority must be exercised, or it atrophies. It is not self-sustaining through belief alone. The discipline of speaking truth each morning keeps authority active. Without use, authority becomes theoretical, something you affirm mentally but never apply practically. The unseen realm responds to exercised authority, not abstract belief. Emotion-driven prayer often waits for a feeling of urgency. Authority-driven prayer establishes urgency where necessary and calm where possible. It does not rise and fall with anxiety. It does not chase crises. It positions itself so that crises encounter resistance before they escalate. When declarations are made early, the day encounters boundaries already in place. Decisions are filtered through those boundaries. Distractions lose leverage. Temptations appear less persuasive because they arrive in an environment already defined. This is why many failures occur not in moments of overwhelming temptation, but in moments of undefined intention. When nothing has been declared, everything is negotiable. Morning declarations are not about controlling every outcome. They are about controlling alignment. You cannot dictate every event, but you can determine how you stand when events occur. Authority ensures that reactions do not replace convictions. Without early declaration, the day gradually negotiates your standards downward. Small compromises seem harmless until they accumulate into patterns. There is also restraint in true authority. Declaring alignment in the morning is not an act of aggression, but of order. Authority does not need to announce itself repeatedly. It establishes terms once and enforces them consistently. This is why a disciplined morning often results in a quieter mind throughout the day. Chaos resists order initially, but eventually yields when it finds no opening. When authority is not established early, people often attempt to recover it later through force. Strong words spoken in frustration, rushed prayers under pressure, impulsive decisions made to regain control. These efforts are usually less effective because they are corrective rather than foundational. It is always harder to reclaim ground than to hold it from the beginning. The morning offers a rare opportunity, a window where authority can be established without resistance. No crisis is yet demanding negotiation. No failure is yet requiring repair. This is the moment when truth can be stated simply, clearly, without interference. To miss this moment is not catastrophic, but it is costly. Authority declared early does not guarantee an easy day, it guarantees a governed one. And a governed day, even when difficult, moves with purpose rather than panic. When you decree alignment at dawn, you do not eliminate opposition. You ensure that opposition does not decide the terms of engagement. The unseen realm does not respond to panic, volume, or desperation. It responds to order. Order is the language of authority, and authority functions only within defined structure. This is why obedience matters more than urgency, and why alignment outweighs emotion. When things are in their proper place, resistance loses leverage because it has nothing to exploit. Many misunderstand obedience as restriction, when in reality it is positioning. Obedience places you where authority is recognized. Outside of alignment, effort increases, but effectiveness decreases. This is why frantic spiritual activity often produces little change. Motion without order is noise. Order without motion, however, still carries weight because it establishes jurisdiction. The unseen realm recognizes boundaries instantly. It knows what has been legitimately established and what is being improvised. Covenant positioning is not something you invent in the moment. It is something you stand within. When you operate within established truth, you are not negotiating terms, you are enforcing them. Desperation signals uncertainty. Order signals confidence. This is why routine matters. Consistency is visible in realms that ignore words spoken only under pressure. A disciplined morning prayer is not impressive because of its length, but because of its predictability. Predictability communicates permanence. What is permanent does not need to argue for relevance. Obedience aligns intention with structure. It removes ambiguity. Ambiguity is the primary entry point for disruption. When instructions are unclear, chaos improvises. When alignment is clear, opposition hesitates. It is not that resistance disappears, it loses initiative. Initiative always belongs to the one who establishes order first. Covenant positioning means standing in what has already been authorized rather than attempting to create authority on the spot. Many attempt to pray from need instead of position. Need-centered prayer focuses on what is lacking. Position-centered prayer focuses on what is established. One appeals for intervention, the other assumes enforcement. The unseen realm responds more readily to the latter because it operates on recognition, not persuasion. There is also timing involved. Order established early has a compounding effect. When alignment is set at the beginning of the day, every decision that follows either reinforces it or violates it. This creates internal clarity. You do not spend energy debating every choice because the framework is already in place. Debate drains authority, clarity preserves it. Desperation often arises from delay. When alignment is postponed, issues accumulate. Then prayer becomes reactive, loaded with urgency and fear. That emotional weight does not strengthen authority. It weakens it by shifting focus from structure to outcome. Outcomes are variable. Structure is stable. The unseen realm anchors itself to stability. Order also creates restraint. Not every thought needs to be pursued. Not every emotion deserves expression. Obedience disciplines response. This discipline is not suppression, it is stewardship. Authority cannot be trusted to those who cannot govern themselves. Morning alignment is the rehearsal of self-governance. Covenant positioning does not mean immunity from difficulty, it means clarity within difficulty. When pressure comes, you are not scrambling to remember what you believe or where you stand. That has already been settled. Settled positions free mental capacity. Freed capacity increases discernment. Discernment prevents unnecessary battles. Many conflicts are prolonged not because they are powerful, but because they are engaged improperly. When order is absent, energy is wasted on symptoms instead of causes. When alignment is present, causes are addressed early, often quietly, before they escalate. This is why disciplined mornings often lead to uneventful days, not because nothing happens, but because nothing gains traction. The unseen realm respects what is consistently honored. A life that repeatedly aligns itself with established truth becomes predictable in the best sense. Predictability creates trust. Trust grants latitude. When alignment is habitual, authority becomes natural rather than forced. Desperation exhausts. Order stabilizes. Obedience simplifies. Covenant positioning clarifies. These are not abstract ideals. They are operational principles. When the day begins with alignment rather than anxiety, you are not asking the unseen realm to rescue you from disorder. You are demonstrating that disorder has already been addressed. In the end, what governs the unseen is not how urgently you cry out, but how faithfully you stand where you were meant to stand. Order is not dramatic, but it is decisive. Scripture is not merely inspirational language or historical record. It is legal testimony. It establishes precedent, defines jurisdiction, and authorizes action. When truth is spoken, it does not function as commentary on reality. It functions as an instrument that shapes reality. This is why spoken truth carries weight far beyond private reflection. What remains unspoken remains unenforced. Words spoken aloud cross from thought into declaration. Thoughts may inspire conviction, but declarations establish boundaries. The unseen realm does not respond to silent agreement as reliably as it responds to articulated alignment. Spoken scripture is not for information, it is for enforcement. It states what is permitted and what is not. A weapon is only effective when wielded with intent and accuracy. Random verses spoken without understanding do not carry the same authority as truth applied deliberately. Scripture functions as both weapon and warrant. As a weapon, it confronts opposition. As a warrant, it justifies action. One without the other creates imbalance, aggression without legitimacy, or legitimacy without action. The authority of Scripture is not amplified by emotion, it is activated by obedience. When spoken from alignment, it does not argue, it asserts. The power is not in vocal intensity but in congruence between belief, position, and speech. This is why consistency matters. A truth spoken daily establishes pattern. A pattern establishes expectation. Expectation reinforces authority. The morning is the ideal time to speak Scripture because the mind has not yet been cluttered with competing narratives. Before news, before conversations, before demands, truth can be installed as the governing framework. Once installed, other inputs are evaluated against it rather than replacing it. This is not denial of reality. It is prioritization of authority. Spoken truth also disciplines language throughout the day. What you declare early shapes what you permit yourself to say later. Complaints lose momentum when they contradict what has already been affirmed. Fear struggles to gain voice when confidence has already been declared. Words spoken in the morning become reference points for words spoken under pressure. Scripture also functions as a reminder of limits. Not every challenge requires engagement. Not every provocation deserves response. Truth establishes what matters and what does not. Without this filter, energy is wasted on distractions. With it, focus sharpens. Authority increases not by doing more, but by doing less that is unnecessary. The legal nature of Scripture means it must be cited accurately. Misapplied truth creates confusion rather than clarity. This is why understanding context matters. Truth divorced from understanding becomes superstition. Understanding without application becomes theory. The balance of both produces authority. When Scripture is spoken, it aligns the speaker as much as it confronts opposition. It is not primarily outward-facing, it is inward aligning. The act of speaking truth forces internal agreement. You cannot declare what you fundamentally reject without experiencing tension. That tension exposes misalignment. Exposure allows correction. This is why resistance often increases when truth is first spoken. It is not always external opposition. Sometimes it is internal inconsistency being challenged. This is not failure. It is calibration. Once alignment is corrected, resistance diminishes because there is no longer internal conflict to exploit. Scripture spoken in the morning also establishes continuity. It connects the day to something larger than immediate circumstances. This perspective reduces anxiety. Anxiety thrives on isolation and immediacy. Truth restores scale. When scale is restored, pressure shrinks. A spoken word cannot be retrieved. Once released, it stands. This permanence is why careless words cause damage and deliberate words create stability. Morning declarations are intentional investments. They may not produce immediate visible change, but they shape invisible structure. Visible outcomes eventually follow structure. The weaponized nature of truth does not imply aggression, it implies clarity. A clear boundary does not threaten, it simply exists. When truth is spoken consistently, it becomes the environment rather than the exception. Opposition adapts or withdraws because there is nothing to negotiate. Ultimately, Scripture spoken aloud in the morning is an act of governance. It is the declaration that this day will not be interpreted solely by circumstance or emotion, but by established truth. When truth governs language, language governs thought. When thought is governed, action follows in order. What you speak first becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. That is why Scripture must not remain silent. Discipline at the beginning of the day is often misunderstood as rigidity, but it is actually the foundation of resilience. What is established early determines what can be sustained later. The pressures that arrive by midday rarely announce themselves in advance. They emerge gradually, layering distraction, fatigue, and decision-making until clarity is eroded. A disciplined morning counters this erosion before it begins. Resilience is not the ability to endure endlessly. It is the ability to recover quickly without losing alignment. That recovery depends on what was installed before stress appeared. When the morning begins without structure, resilience must be improvised under pressure. Improvisation consumes energy. Discipline conserves it. The first hours of the day shape the nervous system's expectations. When the day starts in haste, the body learns to remain in a reactive state. Reaction becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. A disciplined morning interrupts this chain. It teaches the mind and body that order exists before demand, that purpose precedes pressure. By noon, most people are no longer making decisions. They are spending the consequences of earlier ones. Fatigue does not simply come from activity. It comes from unresolved choices and internal friction. Morning discipline reduces friction by pre-deciding what matters. When priorities are established early, fewer decisions compete for attention later. Fewer decisions mean less exhaustion. Victory by nightfall is rarely the result of heroic effort late in the day. It is usually the result of quiet consistency early in the day. Small acts of discipline compound. A brief, focused morning alignment often outweighs hours of reactive effort later. This is why discipline feels disproportionately powerful. It leverages time. Resilience also involves emotional regulation. Emotions are informative but unreliable leaders. A disciplined morning acknowledges emotions without enthroning them. When feelings are recognized but not given authority, they lose the ability to hijack decisions. This creates emotional stamina. You are not suppressing emotion, you are placing it in its proper role. Pressure tends to reveal, not create, weakness. What collapses under stress was already unsupported. Morning discipline reinforces support structures before stress tests them. It strengthens the internal framework so that external weight does not cause distortion. By the afternoon, unexpected disruptions are almost guaranteed. Interruptions, delays, conflicts, and disappointments are not exceptions. They are features of a full day. Discipline does not eliminate these, but it determines how much authority they are given. A disciplined morning turns disruptions into variables rather than crises. There is also a cumulative confidence that comes from consistency. When you repeatedly begin the day with intention, you build trust in your own alignment. This trust reduces anxiety about future challenges. You are no longer wondering whether you will hold up under pressure. You have evidence that you can. Victory by nightfall does not always mean external success. Sometimes it means integrity preserved, peace maintained, or restraint exercised. These victories are less visible but more enduring. They prevent the need for recovery the next morning. Without discipline, the evening often becomes a time of regret and review. What should have been done differently, what was mishandled, what slipped. With discipline, the evening becomes a time of closure. Loose ends are fewer, reflection is calmer, rest is deeper. The day follows the tone set in the morning. Tone is subtle but powerful. It influences pace, reaction, and perception. A disciplined tone reduces urgency without reducing effectiveness. It creates space for discernment. Discernment prevents unnecessary conflict. Discipline is not about perfection. It is about reliability. You do not need flawless mornings. You need consistent ones. Consistency builds momentum. Momentum carries you through resistance. Resistance loses influence when momentum is steady. As the day closes, the benefits of morning discipline become clear. You are less drained, less reactive, less fragmented. Even difficult days feel purposeful rather than chaotic. This is the quiet reward of discipline. It pays dividends long after the effort is forgotten. What you do at dawn determines how much strength you have at dusk. Resilience is not found when you need it most. It is built when you least feel like building it. Spiritual conflict is often misunderstood as a constant state of attack. But in reality, it is a balance of resistance and advance. To stand firm without advancing leads to stagnation. To advance without standing firm leads to collapse. Effective engagement requires both. The morning is where this balance is set, long before opposition becomes visible. Defense establishes boundaries. It defines what will not be surrendered. Offensive movement defines what will be pursued. Without defense, offense becomes reckless. Without offense, defense becomes passive. The two are not opposites, they are complementary functions of the same authority. Standing firm begins with clarity of position. You cannot defend ground you have not defined. Morning alignment defines that ground. It identifies convictions, priorities, and limits. Once defined, these become non-negotiable. Pressure may test them, but it cannot easily move them. Advancing purpose requires intention. Purpose does not drift forward on its own, it must be directed. Without early intention, the day fills with activity that feels productive but does not advance anything meaningful. Movement without direction creates exhaustion, not progress. The defensive aspect of spiritual engagement is often quiet. It involves restraint, patience, and discernment. Knowing when not to engage is as important as knowing when to act. Many battles are lost, not because of weakness, but because of unnecessary engagement. Morning discipline teaches selectivity. Offense, on the other hand, involves initiative. Initiative belongs to the one who acts before being forced. When you move proactively toward what matters, opposition reacts rather than leads. Reaction always carries less leverage than initiation. Standing firm protects integrity. Advancing purpose fulfills calling. Integrity without purpose becomes self-preservation. Purpose without integrity becomes ambition. The morning is where these are aligned so that advancement does not compromise stability. Spiritual defense is not fear-based. It does not scan the horizon obsessively. It simply holds ground. Held ground reduces anxiety because it removes the need for constant vigilance. You are not guarding everything. You are guarding what matters. Offensive movement requires courage, but not aggression. It requires clarity about why something is worth pursuing. When purpose is clear, resistance loses its ability to intimidate. Intimidation thrives on uncertainty. Certainty neutralizes it. Many people confuse busyness with advance. Busyness is often reactive, responding to demands set by others. Advance is deliberate, moving toward goals you have already defined. Morning alignment distinguishes between the two. It filters tasks through purpose. Defense also involves recovery. Knowing when to pause, retreat, or rest is part of standing firm. Constant advance without recovery weakens position. Morning clarity allows for sustainable pace. Sustainability preserves long-term effectiveness. Offense without patience becomes force. Defense without flexibility becomes rigidity. The balance requires wisdom. Wisdom grows from consistent reflection, not constant action. Morning reflection cultivates this wisdom before urgency clouds judgment. Purpose advances in increments, not leaps. Small, consistent steps taken daily outperform sporadic bursts of effort. Morning intention identifies the next step rather than the entire journey. This reduces overwhelm and increases follow-through. Standing firm also involves identity. You defend who you are before you pursue what you do. When identity is secure, criticism loses power. When identity is uncertain, every challenge feels personal. Morning alignment reinforces identity so that advancement is not derailed by opinion. Offensive movement often triggers resistance. Resistance is not a sign of error. It is often confirmation of direction. When purpose is aligned, resistance refines rather than deters. Without alignment, resistance confuses and discourages. Defense ensures you are not pulled backward while moving forward. It anchors progress. Anchors do not stop movement, they stabilize it. Without anchors, movement is vulnerable to drift. The day will demand both firmness and forward motion. Situations will arise that require restraint and others that require action. When the morning establishes this balance, decisions become clearer. You are not choosing between fear and force. You are choosing between wisdom and impulse. Standing firm and advancing purpose are not seasonal strategies. They are daily disciplines. Each morning resets the balance. Each day tests it. Those who understand this are not surprised by conflict. They are prepared for it. Progress is not measured by how hard you fight, but by how faithfully you move in the right direction without losing your footing. Spiritual conflict is often misunderstood as a constant state of attack, but in reality, it is a balance of resistance and advance. To stand firm without advancing leads to stagnation. To advance without standing firm leads to collapse. Effective engagement requires both. The morning is where this balance is set, long before opposition becomes visible. Defense establishes boundaries. It defines what will not be surrendered. Offensive movement defines what will be pursued. Without defense, offense becomes reckless. Without offense, defense becomes passive. The two are not opposites. They are complementary functions of the same authority. Standing firm begins with clarity of position. You cannot defend ground you have not defined. Morning alignment defines that ground. It identifies convictions, priorities, and limits. Once defined, these become non-negotiable. Pressure may test them, but it cannot easily move them. Advancing purpose requires intention. Purpose does not drift forward on its own. It must be directed. Without early intention, the day fills with activity that feels productive, but does not advance anything meaningful. Movement without direction creates exhaustion, not progress. The defensive aspect of spiritual engagement is often quiet. It involves restraint, patience, and discernment. Knowing when not to engage is as important as knowing when to act. Many battles are lost not because of weakness, but because of unnecessary engagement. Morning discipline teaches selectivity. Offense, on the other hand, involves initiative. Initiative belongs to the one who acts before being forced. When you move proactively toward what matters, opposition reacts rather than leads. Reaction always carries less leverage than initiation. Standing firm protects integrity. Advancing purpose fulfills calling. Integrity without purpose becomes self-preservation. Purpose without integrity becomes ambition. The morning is where these are aligned so that advancement does not compromise stability. Spiritual defense is not fear-based. It does not scan the horizon obsessively. It simply holds ground. Held ground reduces anxiety because it removes the need for constant vigilance. You are not guarding everything. You are guarding what matters. Offensive movement requires courage, but not aggression. It requires clarity about why something is worth pursuing. When purpose is clear, resistance loses its ability to intimidate. Intimidation thrives on uncertainty. Certainty neutralizes it. Many people confuse busyness with advance. Busyness is often reactive, responding to demands set by others. Advance is deliberate, moving toward goals you have already defined. Morning alignment distinguishes between the two. It filters tasks through purpose. Defense also involves recovery. Knowing when to pause, retreat, or rest is part of standing firm. Constant advance without recovery weakens position. Morning clarity allows for sustainable pace. Sustainability preserves long-term effectiveness. Offense without patience becomes force. Defense without flexibility becomes rigidity. The balance requires wisdom. Wisdom grows from consistent reflection, not constant action. Morning reflection cultivates this wisdom before urgency clouds judgment. Purpose advances in increments, not leaps. Small, consistent steps taken daily outperform sporadic bursts of effort. Morning intention identifies the next step rather than the entire journey. This reduces overwhelm and increases follow-through. Standing firm also involves identity. You defend who you are before you pursue what you do. When identity is secure, criticism loses power. When identity is uncertain, every challenge feels personal. Morning alignment reinforces identity so that advancement is not derailed by opinion. Offensive movement often triggers resistance. Resistance is not a sign of error. It is often confirmation of direction. When purpose is aligned, resistance refines rather than deters. Without alignment, resistance confuses and discourages. Defense ensures you are not pulled backward while moving forward. It anchors progress. Anchors do not stop movement, they stabilize it. Without anchors, movement is vulnerable to drift. The day will demand both firmness and forward motion. Situations will arise that require restraint and others that require action. When the morning establishes this balance, decisions become clearer. You are not choosing between fear and force, you are choosing between wisdom and impulse. Standing firm and advancing purpose are not seasonal strategies, they are daily disciplines. Each morning resets the balance, each day tests it. Those who understand this are not surprised by conflict, they are prepared for it. Progress is not measured by how hard you fight, but by how faithfully you move in the right direction without losing your footing. A surrendered will in the morning is not an act of weakness, it is an act of precision. It removes friction between intention and action before that friction has time to distort decisions. When the will is not surrendered early, it does not remain neutral. It becomes vulnerable to negotiation. The day begins making offers, and without a settled will, those offers slowly redefine direction. Compromise rarely arrives as rebellion. It arrives as reasonableness. Small adjustments, justified delays, softened convictions. None of these feel dangerous in isolation, but together they reshape trajectory. The morning is where this trajectory is either anchored or left adjustable. A will that is surrendered early is not easily bent later. Surrender does not mean passivity. It means alignment. It is the decision to submit personal preference to establish purpose before preferences are challenged. Once challenged, surrender becomes harder because emotion is involved. Early surrender avoids emotional bargaining. It settles the question of authority before pressure demands an answer. Compromise thrives on fatigue. As the day progresses, energy diminishes and clarity blurs. Decisions that would have been rejected in the morning feel acceptable by evening. This is not moral failure, it is human limitation. Morning surrender compensates for this limitation by setting boundaries in advance. A surrendered will simplifies decision-making. When purpose is already chosen, options narrow. Narrow options reduce cognitive load. Reduced load preserves strength. Strength preserves integrity. Integrity prevents regret. This chain begins with surrender, not effort. Without surrender, the will remains fragmented. Competing desires pull in different directions. Fragmentation drains focus and creates internal conflict. Internal conflict weakens resolve. Morning surrender unifies the will around a single governing principle. Unity strengthens resolve without strain. Compromise is often framed as flexibility, but true flexibility requires a fixed center. Without a center, flexibility becomes drift. Morning surrender establishes that center. It allows adaptability without loss of direction. You can respond to change without being redefined by it. The will is most impressionable when it is unexamined. Early hours provide clarity before distraction clouds intention. This clarity makes surrender deliberate rather than reactive. Deliberate surrender carries authority. Reactive surrender carries resentment. Many regrets are not the result of sudden failure, but of gradual concession. Concession begins when the will is left undefined. An undefined will is easily persuaded. Morning surrender defines the will clearly enough that persuasion must confront conviction rather than ambiguity. A surrendered will also governs speech. Words spoken throughout the day reveal alignment or drift. When the will is settled early, speech follows structure. Complaints decrease. Justifications fade. Language becomes measured. Measured language reinforces discipline. Compromise often disguises itself as necessity. I had no choice. In reality, the choice was deferred, not denied. Morning surrender makes choices explicit. What is chosen early cannot be conveniently forgotten later. This accountability protects integrity. Surrender also brings rest. Resistance consumes energy. Surrender releases it. When the will is aligned, effort flows instead of strains. This flow does not remove challenge, but it removes internal opposition to challenge. Challenges faced without internal resistance are less exhausting. A surrendered will does not eliminate desire, it orders it. Ordered desire becomes motivation. Disordered desire becomes distraction. Morning surrender orders desire by placing it under purpose. This order turns longing into direction rather than temptation. Compromise is rarely intentional. It is often the byproduct of avoidance, avoiding discomfort, conflict, or delay. Morning surrender accepts discomfort if necessary. Acceptance removes avoidance. Without avoidance, compromise loses leverage. By evening, the benefits of surrender are evident. Decisions feel coherent rather than conflicted. Actions feel consistent rather than scattered. Even mistakes are clearer, easier to correct because they are exceptions rather than patterns. The day tests the will repeatedly. Each test asks the same question in different forms. Who decides? Morning surrender answers that question once, so it does not need to be answered again under pressure. A will surrendered early is not surrendered repeatedly. It is established. Establishment prevents erosion. Erosion is slow, quiet, and cumulative. Morning surrender halts erosion before it begins. Compromise cannot take root where the will is already anchored. Anchors do not prevent movement, they prevent drift. With the will anchored, movement becomes intentional. In the end, the quality of the day is not determined by how many challenges appear, but by how many decisions were already settled before they appeared. A surrendered will in the morning ensures that when choices arise, they are answered from conviction rather than convenience.